You've always been there, haven't you? The one who picks up every call, answers every message before the screen dims, and shows up without hesitation. You thought being present was your strength, a badge of loyalty, a testament to your care. But somewhere along the way, your availability became a chain. Not the kind that binds with iron, but the kind that slips around your spirit, quiet and insidious until you're carrying the weight of everyone else's needs. You didn't notice at first. You were too busy saying yes, too focused on being the reliable one, the one who never lets anyone down. But every yes you gave was a silent no to your own boundaries, your own peace. You became the person who's always there, and in doing so, you became invisible. Not because you faded, but because you were too constant, too predictable, too easy to take for granted. People don't cherish what's always within reach. They don't chase what's guaranteed. They don't value what doesn't demand effort. You thought your openness would earn their respect, their love, their gratitude. Instead, it made you a fixture, like a lamp in the corner, useful but rarely noticed until it burns out. You gave your time, your energy, your heart, and they took it, not because they were cruel, but because you trained them to expect it. You became the emotional crutch, the listener who never interrupts, the fixer who never breaks.
And in their eyes, you became replaceable. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were too much of what they didn't have to work for. You thought you were building connection, but you were building dependency. You thought you were showing love, but you were showing fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being unneeded, fear of being alone. And that fear drove you to give more, to stay longer, to respond faster, until you were pouring yourself into others while your own cup ran dry. You didn't see it then, but every time you answered a late-night text, every time you dropped everything to solve someone else's crisis, you were teaching them that your time had no boundaries, that your energy was limitless, that your presence was theirs to claim. And they claimed it again and again until you were less a person and more a function, a role they could rely on without ever truly seeing.
From childhood, you learned it. Maybe it was a parent who praised you for being good, for being helpful, for never causing trouble. Maybe it was a teacher who rewarded your quick compliance, or a friend who leaned on you when their world felt heavy. You were taught that your value lay in how much you could give, how quickly you could respond, how seamlessly you could fit into someone else's needs. You learned to wear a mask, not a literal one, but a persona you crafted to be accepted, to be loved, to be safe. This mask wasn't made of lies. It was made of kindness, of patience, of availability. It was the version of you that said yes when you wanted to say no, that smiled when you wanted to cry, that stayed when you wanted to leave. You wore it so well that it became second nature, a reflex you didn't question. You became the one who always understands, always forgives, always shows up even when it costs you pieces of yourself you didn't know you were losing. This mask wasn't just for others, it was for you too. It protected you from the fear of rejection, from the pain of being unseen, from the risk of being too much or not enough. But masks, even the kindest ones, come at a price. Every time you wore it, you hid a little more of your true self. You buried your needs, your anger, your limits, because those didn't fit the role you were playing. You became so good at being what others needed that you forgot how to be what you needed, and the world loved it.
They called you selfless, empathetic, reliable. They praised your heart, your generosity, your strength. But what they didn't tell you was that your selflessness was their convenience. Your empathy was their shortcut. Your reliability was their entitlement. Over time, your mask became a cage, and you didn't even notice the bars closing in. You thought you were choosing connection, but you were choosing sacrifice. You thought you were building bonds, but you were building expectations. And those expectations grew heavier, more demanding, until you were carrying the emotional weight of everyone around you, while your own soul begged for rest. You thought being needed was the same as being valued. You thought if you were indispensable, they'd never leave. So you made yourself indispensable. You answered every call, fixed every problem, soothed every wound. You became the one they turned to when their lives unraveled, the one they knew would always be there. And for a while it felt good. It felt like purpose, like proof that you mattered. But being needed isn't the same as being seen. Being needed isn't love, it's utility. And utility, no matter how vital, is rarely cherished. You were their safe harbor, their emotional anchor, their go-to when the world felt too big. But the moment their storms passed, they sailed away, leaving you to clean up the wreckage. They didn't call to check on you. They didn't ask how you were holding up. They didn't notice the cracks forming in your foundation because they were too busy standing on it. You thought if you gave enough, they'd see your worth.
You thought if you were always there, they'd stay. But the truth is, the more you gave, the less they noticed. The more available you were, the less they cared. Not because they were heartless, but because you made it too easy. You removed the effort, the mystery, the challenge. You handed them your presence on a silver platter, and they took it without question, without gratitude, without reciprocation. You became the background to their lives, essential but invisible, like the air they breathe or the ground they walk on. And the harder you tried to prove your worth, the more you proved you didn't need to be earned. You were so afraid of being forgotten that you made yourself unforgettable in all the wrong ways. Unforgettable as a tool, as a resource, as a function, but not as a person. You gave them everything, and in return, they gave you absence. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were too much of what they didn't have to fight for. Your energy isn't infinite, though you've lived as if it were. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you respond when you want to stay silent, every time you pour yourself into someone else's chaos, you're spending something sacred. Your attention, your time, your emotional reserves, they're not endless. They're a currency, one you've been spending recklessly, giving it away to people who never earned it, who never valued it, who never even noticed the cost. Each interaction is a transaction, and you've been underpricing yourself for years. That quick text you sent to avoid conflict, that conversation you stayed in to keep the peace, that favor you did because you couldn't say no, they all took something from you. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, cumulative way that left you hollow. You didn't run out of energy because you're weak. You ran out because you've been bleeding it into places that don't feed you back. You've been giving your light to people who only know how to take, and you wonder why you feel dim. You've been carrying their burdens while ignoring your own, and you wonder why you feel heavy. You've been reacting, explaining, defending, when you could have been resting, healing, growing. Every time you engage with someone who doesn't deserve your response, you're draining a resource you can't afford to lose. You're not just giving them your time, you're giving them your clarity, your focus, your peace. And they don't even notice because they've learned to expect it. They've learned that you'll always be there, always answer, always give. But your soul isn't a vending machine. It's not built to dispense comfort on demand. It's a living, breathing thing that needs care, boundaries, rest. And until you start guarding it, you'll keep attracting people who sense you don't. People who poke at your wounds to see if you'll react. People who push your buttons to keep you small. People who take your kindness and call it obligation. You're not tired because you're not enough. You're tired because you've been giving too much to too many for too long.
What happens when you stop? When you stop answering every call, stop fixing every problem, stop being the one who's always there. The world doesn't end. The people who relied on you don't collapse, but something does shift. The moment you pull back, the dynamic changes. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything they've been avoiding. Your absence becomes a question they can't ignore. You're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. You're not being cruel, you're being honest. You're not abandoning them, you're reclaiming you. And they feel it. They feel the ground shift beneath them because you've stopped being their foundation. They'll call it selfish, they'll call it distant, they'll call it cold. But what they're really saying is, you're not playing the role I assigned you anymore. They're not upset because you've changed. They're upset because you've stopped being predictable. You've stopped being their emotional safety net, their default response, their constant comfort. And in that space, that silence, they're forced to face what they've been running from, their own needs, their own chaos, their own inability to stand without you holding them up. Your withdrawal isn't rejection, it's revelation.
It shows you who they are when you're no longer carrying their weight. Some will guilt you, try to pull you back with words like "you've changed" or "I miss the old you." Others will fade away because they were never there for you, only for what you provided. And a rare few might step up, might see you for the first time, might realize what they've lost. But that's not why you pull back. You don't do it to manipulate or to win them over. You do it because you're done being invisible. You're done being the one who bleeds so others can feel whole. You're done giving your energy to people who don't know its worth. When you step back, you create space, not just for them to notice, but for you to remember who you are when you're not performing, not pleasing, not sacrificing. You create space to breathe, to heal, to rebuild. And in that space, you find something you didn't expect. Strength. Not the strength of carrying others, but the strength of standing in your own truth. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're gates to let your soul breathe. They're not about shutting others off. They're about letting yourself in. For so long, you've lived without them, believing that love meant being open, that connection meant being available, that kindness meant saying yes. But love without limits isn't love. It's surrender. Connection without boundaries isn't connection. It's consumption. Kindness without restraint isn't kindness. It's self-betrayal. Setting boundaries feels wrong at first, like you're breaking some unspoken rule, like you're being selfish or cruel. You've been conditioned to believe that your role is to give, to serve, to be there, no matter the cost. But boundaries aren't about denying others. They're about honoring yourself. They're about saying, my time is valuable, my energy is sacred, my peace is non-negotiable. They're about choosing who gets access to you, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. When you set boundaries, you stop being the emotional dumping ground. You stop being the one who fixes what others break. You stop being the one who answers every call, even when it's tearing you apart. And yes, people will push back. They'll test your limits, guilt you into bending, accuse you of being distant. But that's not a sign you're wrong. It's a sign you're right, because boundaries expose the truth. They show you who respects you and who only wanted access. They show you who loves you and who only loved your compliance. They show you who's willing to meet you halfway and who was only there for the ride. Boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're about saying yes to yourself, yes to your needs, your dreams, your healing, yes to the life you deserve, not the one you've been settling for. And the more you practice them, the stronger they become. The more you guard your energy, the more you attract people who value it. The more you protect your peace, the more you realize you never needed to beg for it in the first place. This is where you begin again. Not as the person who's always there, always giving, always bending. Not as the mask you wore or the role you played, but as you, unfiltered, unapologetic, whole. The journey to this point wasn't easy. It meant letting go of people who only loved your availability. It meant sitting with the ache of being misunderstood, of being called cold, of being left behind. It meant facing the fear that maybe you're not enough when you're not giving everything. But in that space, that quiet, that solitude, you found something you'd forgotten: yourself. You found the voice that was drowned out by notifications, the strength that was buried under expectations, the worth that was never tied to how much you could give. You're not rebuilding from scratch, you're uncovering what was always there, hidden beneath layers of sacrifice and performance. This is your rebirth, not as someone new, but as someone true. You're no longer the one who answers every call, who fixes every mess, who carries every burden. You're the one who chooses where your energy goes, who guards their peace like a treasure, who knows their worth doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. And yes, some will walk away, some will call you selfish, some will never understand, but let them go. They were never yours to keep. They were tied to a version of you that no longer exists, a version that gave too much to be seen, that broke itself to be loved.
The ones who stay, the ones who see you now, they're the ones who matter. They're the ones who value your boundaries, who respect your silence, who love you for your truth, not your utility. And as you step into this new version of yourself, you'll feel the shift. The world feels lighter, not because it's changed, but because you have. You're no longer carrying the weight of others' expectations. You're no longer chasing approval you never needed. You're no longer afraid of being forgotten because you've remembered who you are. This is the freedom you didn't know you could have. Not the freedom to be loved by everyone, but the freedom to love yourself enough to stop trying.